Deep in the night, when the last lights in the houses were going out and the wind was howling in the dark alleys, strange events began to happen in the village lost among the forests. No one knew exactly what caused them, but every day the terrifying changes became more and more obvious. Her name was Marina. She had been born and raised in this village, and all that was familiar to her were the ramshackle houses, the misty morning horizons, and the dense forests that always hid something untold. Ever since she was a child, she had heard old men whispering that the forest didn't like people and that anyone who got lost in it would disappear forever. She used to think these were just fears born in the dark corners of the old men's minds. But now, years later, she was beginning to doubt it. In the evening, when Marina was coming home from work, there was something unusual in the air. At first she felt it as a chill running down her back. Then she noticed that the sky seemed to become dense, and the wind stopped rustling in the leaves. The birds were silent, and even the wind seemed to cease to exist. Everything around it was motionless, like a tomb. But the strangest thing was the silence. Absolute. Even her footsteps on the road seemed loud enough to disturb this ominous peace. When Marina approached her house, she saw that the door was open, although she remembered exactly that she had closed it before going out. Anxious thoughts swirled in her head. She quietly stepped inside and immediately sensed that something was wrong. The apartment was cold, as if someone hadn't stoked the stove for a long time. The walls, usually warm and cozy, seemed alien and stiff. A small mirror hanging in the corner of the room caught her eye. In the reflection, she saw something. Some movement in the corner. Marina flinched. She approached the mirror, but saw no one but herself. However, her eyes lingered on her own reflection, and at that moment she noticed her shadow on the wall suddenly moved slightly. It was impossible, but she could have sworn that the shadow was not repeating her movements. She jumped away from the mirror, a chill in her heart. Fear squeezed her chest, and Marina rushed to the window. Behind the glass, among the dense forest, flashed some figure. Unclear, blurred, but clearly human. She could not make out the details, but the feeling that someone was watching her became unbearable. She closed the curtains abruptly, sat down on the couch, and tried to breathe evenly. There were only monotonous thoughts in her head. What was that? Who was that? Why can't I calm down? Her phone suddenly vibrated on the table. It was a text from her sister, Anya. Are you home? She asked. Marina dialed back instantly. Yes, but something strange is going on. I can't figure out what. No reply came. Instead, her phone vibrated again, but now with an unusual notification, missed call. A number she didn't know popped up on the screen. A sickening feeling slid through her body again, and she involuntarily pressed call back. It wasn't her sister calling, but her own voice. Marina, it's me. You have to come back. They're here. They're coming for you. Dots swam in front of her eyes, and her breathing stopped. She closed the phone and put her hands over her ears, trying to get rid of the sounds. But they wouldn't go away. The words kept echoing in her head, and with each repetition they grew louder, closer. The door outside creaked quietly again. Marina clutched the phone in her hands, feeling its cold body become like a heavy stone. With each creak of the door, her heart beat faster and faster, and her mind began to race. What was going on? Who was it? And why wasn't her sister answering? The creaking of the door grew louder and louder, as if someone outside was trying to break into the house. She froze, unable to move from her spot. Suddenly, amidst the lingering silence, there was a quiet knock on the window. Marina slowly turned her head. The glass reflected the dim lights of the street lamps, but behind them, against the background of the obscurantist forest, she recognized a silhouette. The same blurred, inhuman shape moving toward her window. The shadow became more and more distinct, its contours seemed to merge with the night darkness, but the longer Marina looked, the more it seemed that the figure in the window does not cast a reflection at all. Goosebumps ran down her body from fear, and she abruptly moved away from the window. As if in response to her movement, the silhouette behind the glass took a step forward, and Marina involuntarily screamed. In response, there was a strange, metallic, hoarse sound, as if something that should not have made a sound, gave it out through force. Then silence again. Only now it was different, dead, like a dying river. And the shadow was gone. Almost without realizing what she was doing, Marina ran to the door and began to lock it shut. Her hands were shaking and her heart was pounding in her ears. When all the locks were bolted, she jumped to the phone and tried to dial her sister's number again. But a message appeared on the screen, * too late. She leaned back against the wall, feeling her body grow heavy and infirm. Suddenly everything around her was swallowed up by a barely perceptible noise, as if something was moving in the room. Smoothly, but getting closer with each passing moment. The world around her began to dim, as if the light was being wiped from every object in her room, and the same ominous clatter was heard again from outside, only now it was in several places at once. Marina stood up and moved briskly toward the door, but immediately stopped when she felt something cold touch her shoulder. She turned around. Behind her stood a figure. Tall and frail, like a tree frozen in eternal winter. The face was draped in a mask of sprawling cracks, as if the skin had long since pulled away from the bones. The shadow that stood before her did not move, but in its eyes flickered a fire in which reality itself melted. It was not a person, nor was it even a creature that could be called living. Rather, it was the embodiment of something that had once been human, but had now forgotten that it existed in this world. Marina tried to step back, but her legs wouldn't obey. Each movement became heavier, as if the air in the room had become viscous, constricting her chest, making it hard to breathe. "Have you come for me?" she whispered. Her own voice seemed alien. The answer was mute, but the coldness emanating from that figure became unbearable. The shadow took a step forward. "You don't understand," the figure whispered back, and Marina felt the voice vibrate inside her head. "You are not alone here. You've never been alone. We are always around. We are always watching. We're always waiting." The dark eyes, like black mirrors, reflected her terror, absorbing it, making it more and more meaningless. Her hands were busy with a futile attempt to open the window, and her thoughts were confused. Beyond the walls of the room, in the darkness of the night, something was moving, emerging from the shadows. Something ancient. Something terrifying. She suddenly realized that all her life this force had been there, waiting for her, and now it was her moment. Suddenly the shadow vanished like smoke, dissolving into thin air. But the world was different. Infinite. Eternal. A world where there is no sun, no time. And she saw them, the people who had disappeared before her. Saw their faces, and in each of them was the same look, a deep, burning emptiness in which there was no room for hope. These people were part of something much bigger, much scarier than they had ever imagined. Marina turned, but instead of her reflection in the mirror, there was only emptiness, as if she, too, had been swallowed by a shadow. The one who had been watching sighed, and her name was spoken, Marina. Silence fell on the house again, and in that instant it was clear to her that she would never leave. Marina stood in front of the mirror, feeling her body lose all gravity. She couldn't understand what was happening to her, but she felt her consciousness dissolving into the void, drowning in a dark, viscous shadow that grew thicker and stiffer with each passing moment. She tried to move, but couldn't. It was as if invisible hands were clutching her soul, squeezing, pulling her mind into the abyss. A few moments seemed to pass, but it felt as if an eternity had passed. Then the same voice sounded in her head again, hoarse, quiet, but at the same time frighteningly clear. * You won't leave. You can't leave. She couldn't understand where the voice was coming from. It wasn't from the outside world, it was more like it was inside her. It pierced her consciousness like a needle, penetrating deep into the very essence of her existence. The shadow that thickened around her wasn't just evil. It was something more ancient. It was something that had always existed, as eternal as time itself. In that moment, Marina realized that she hadn't just become part of this world. She had become part of something far more terrible, something that had no beginning and no end. Just a void that consumed all living things. Suddenly her body moved. She took a step, and that step was like the last increasing thunder in the heart of a storm that could not be stopped. With each step, her perception of the world became more and more cloudy. The walls of the room were disappearing, and now in front of her was not her apartment, but a dark corridor, long and endless. On the walls, faded traces of time, which as if could not disappear, despite everything. Step by step, Marina moved forward, not knowing where she was going, but no longer having the strength to go back. The farther she walked, the colder the air became. And the more steps she took, the more the fabric of reality was torn. The reflections flickering in the corners of her vision became more and more alien. They were not people, but some entities, distorted, disfigured, transformed into something incomprehensible and terrifying. When she took another step, she felt her feet sink into something liquid, cold and sticky. Under her fingernails there was something hard, like a viscous mass that kept her from moving. Marina wanted to scream, but she couldn't. The sound of her voice didn't reach her ears, as if space had swallowed up all sound. Only heavy breathing and the desperate pounding of her heart filled her consciousness. She looked up and saw a dark liquid dripping from the ceiling. The drops fell slowly to the floor like shadows spreading across the space. And with each drop, the sounds grew louder and louder until they filled the whole place. It wasn't just a sound. It was a noise that tore at the very fabric of reality. And then she saw it. At the end of the corridor, in that hazy darkness, stood figures. There were many of them, hundreds, thousands. They did not move, but from their eyes shone a cold, lifeless light. A light that was no longer light, but emptiness itself. Marina felt her heart pounding in her ears and her eyes beginning to blur. She knew she couldn't turn back. All that was left was to move forward, step by step, further and further into this darkness. But she took another step and felt a painful wave pierce her body, as if she had disintegrated into 1,000 pieces, each atom screaming, but no sound could break through the vast emptiness. Asterisk, you're already here. You're already one of us. The words spoken by the creature echoed in her mind. And in that moment, she realized that she wasn't alone to begin with. She was part of something in this world that wasn't just dark and scary, but distorted and sick. These entities, these shadows, all of it, it was all part of this eternal, endless darkness. And everyone who came here became part of that pain. Then, just like the night it all began, she saw a familiar face. It was her sister. But now her eyes were empty. And now, standing in front of her, her sister spoke words that tore at her soul. "We are all here, Marina. We are all here." And before Marina could realize what was happening, her consciousness was swallowed by darkness. With the same hoarse sound, with the same echoing void, she could no longer distinguish where her body ended and where the world began. Where her thoughts ended and where their reality began. But she was no longer a part of this world. She had become a shadow. And shadows have no beginning and no end.